Unit 3, Lesson 9, Converting Between Standard and Factored Forms. So what's a complex trinomial? So we're going to look at something called a complex trinomial. And a complex trinomial is as follows. It's a trinomial with an a value that's not 1, something other than 1, and that a value cannot be factored out. So that cannot be factored out. In other words, that stretch factor is not a common factor. So a trinomial, so the stretch factor, because a is what we know is a stretch factor, cannot, let's say the stretch factor is not a common factor. Example, 5x squared minus 6x plus 2. 5 is not a common factor of 6 or 2. So we're going to learn how to factor this kind of complex trinomial today. Okay, let's review first some expanding and simplifying. So if I expanded the first expression here, you leave the 2 out, you expand using the distributive property for the other two brackets, you would have 2x squared. 2x times x is 2x squared. 2x times minus 5 is minus 10x. 1 times x is just x, so plus x. And then 1 times minus 5 is minus 5. Collect like terms, so 2 times bracket 2x squared minus 10x plus 1x is minus 9x, and then we have minus 5. And then if you distribute the 2, you would have 2 times 2x squared, which is 4x squared, 2 times minus 9x, which is minus 18x, and 2 times minus 5, which is minus 10. Okay. Let's also review the area method for the next one. So if I drew a little box, oops. Okay, and I have 2 columns and 2 rows. On the columns, I write the titles 5x and 3 plus 3, and the rows, I write x and minus 1, and multiply row times column. So 5x times x is 5x squared. Top right, we'd have 3x. Bottom left, negative 1 and 5x, which makes the minus 5x. And on the bottom right, minus 1 times 3, which is minus 3. And adding up all of our products together, so I have 5x squared plus 3x minus 5x minus 3. And if you collect like terms, we'd have 5x squared plus 3 minus 5 is minus 2. And we have minus 3 at the end. Okay. And similarly for this one here, if you'd factor this, if you expanded this rather, distributed the property, let's just use the distributive property. 2x squared, 2x times 3x is 6x squared. 2x times 4 is 8x. 5 minus 5 times 3 is minus 15x. And minus 5 times 4 is minus 20x. Simplifying gives us 6x squared minus 7x, because 8 minus 15 is minus 7. And we have minus 20. Okay, so let's factor. So how do we factor now an expression that has an a value that's not 1? So we first look at, is this a value a common factor? Because maybe we can common factor this a value. Well, 2 is not a factor of 11, so that can't work. So let's show you a new method on how to factor this. So let's start with determine factors of a times c, then choose the pair that add to b. Okay, so just like before, find 2 numbers whose product is this time a times c, and those same 2 numbers add up to b. The difference, well, it's the same thing as before, because before all we said was a was equal to 1. So if a was equal to 1, then your two numbers would just automatically multiply to give you the c value. But here, it can't just be the 12 anymore. It can't just be the c. You have to give an a value that's not 1. It's 2. So you have to multiply a times c. So a times c equals 24. What are the factors of 24? Well, we have 1 and 24, negative 1 and negative 24. 2 times 12 is 24. Negative 2 times negative 12 is 24. 3 times 8, negative 3 times negative 8, and 4 times 6, and negative 4 times 6. Which pair will give me the middle term b? b is 11. So which pair of numbers add up to 11? Well, it looks like it's this one right here. 3 plus 8 is 11. Okay, so once we have found those two numbers, then the next step would be to follow one of the two methods I'm going to show you here. So method 1, the algebraic method. Okay, so let's write out the question again. Y equals 2x squared plus 11x plus 12. What I'm going to do is called dissociate. Dissociate the middle term. 11x becomes 3x and 8x. Okay, and then you have your plus 12. Then, if you remember, we grouped terms. We're going to group the first two terms, and we're going to group the last two terms. And what we're going to do is find the common factor. So what's the common factor in the first two terms? Well, it's just x. So factor out an x, but only from the first two terms. So that leaves me with leftovers, 2x plus 3. Okay. Now, look at the next two terms. What's the common factor between 8 and 12? Well, I can common factor a 4. So factor out the 4. Leftovers are 8x divided by 4, which is 2x. 12 divided by 4 is 3. And then you may notice in this process, we should have come across two common expressions. And we're going to factor out the common expression, 2x plus 3. So 2x plus 3 goes outside. Create your brackets. So remember, 2x plus 3 comes out the front. And then you have your leftovers, x and 4. Okay, so that's one method of doing it. Method number 2 is kind of like a reverse box method. So the reverse box method goes like this. So you write out your 2x squared. You write out your 12 at the bottom, right? Just like you did when you're expanding. And we found the two terms are 3 and 8, right? So that's going to be your 3x, and that's going to be your 8x. And then you look for, okay, so what are the things that I put on the top and on the side? What do I put here and what do I put here? Okay, well, kind of like go in reverse. So what two terms will give me 2x squared? And so if I put an x here, I can get 2x squared. Well, I need a 2, right? So 2x times what gives me 2x squared? Well, I'm getting an x, right? Remember, this thing on the top and this thing on the side have to be an x. Each of them have to be the x, okay? And, okay, so 2x times x gives me 2x squared. 2x times what gives me 8x? Well, I need the 4 there, plus 4. Okay? And so if 4 times what gives me 12? Well, I need a 3 there, so plus 3. And just check, does x times 3 give me 3x? It does. And then so my answer would be 2x plus 3, and then x plus 4. Okay, now if I want my x-intercepts, well, you gotta set this equation to be 0. So 0 equals 2x plus 3 and x plus 4. Okay. And, okay, so I need this factor to be 0. So 2x plus 3 equals 0 gives me one x-intercept. And this factor here, x plus 4, can be 0 to give me the other x-intercept. So one of those is easy to find. X is going to be negative 4 here. And then this one on the left side, well, if I solve for x, I'd say 2x equals negative 3 if I subtract 3 from both sides, and divide both sides by 2, so negative 3 over 2. So my x-intercepts are going to be negative 4 and 0, and negative 3 over 2 and 0. Okay, let's try another example. 6x squared minus 17x plus 5. So what's a times c? Well, a times c is equal to 30, because 6 times 5 is 30. What are my factors of 30? Well, I have negative 1 and negative 30. I have 1 and 30. I have 2 and 15, and negative 2 and negative 15. And what else we have? 6 times 5, right? You can do that too, but you can go further as much as you want. But if you find the answer, and you already see that if I want the middle term of negative 17, I got to have negative 2 and negative 15 added together to give me that answer. Okay, so let's use method 1 again. If I use method 1, well, we have 6x squared minus 17x plus 5. If I dissociate the middle term, I could write 6x squared minus 2x minus 15x plus 5. So I broke up that 17 into 2 and 15. And then group the two terms in pairs, okay? Find the common factor between the first two terms. And again, let me go backtrack a little bit. It doesn't matter the order where I put 2x and 15x. I could put the 15x first, and I'd still get the same answer at the end. But you just group the first two terms, find the common factor. The common factor here is 2x. Okay. So I can divide 6x squared by 2x, and I get 3x. Negative 2x divided by 2x is minus 1. And if you look at the next two terms, what's the common factor between 15 and 5 is a 5. I want to factor out a minus 5. There's a minus 15 there. So minus 5. And 15x divided by 5 is 3, so 3x. And 5 divided by negative 5 is minus 1. Okay. Notice common expression again. If you don't get the common expression, then check if you made a mistake in the previous line. Okay. So take out the common expression, 3x minus 1. What's left over? 2x and minus 5. Okay. Now, if you want your x-intercept, set that y value to 0, solve for your x. So to get a factor of 0, the x here has to be, so let's say 3x minus 1 equals 0, x equals 1. If I add 1 to both sides and then divide it by 3, 1 over 3. Over here, 2x minus 5 equals to 0. Solve for x. X equals 5 over 2. So my x-intercepts are 5 over 2 and 0, and 1 over 3 and 0. Keep the fractions. Okay. If you're interested in using the box method for this one, draw your box. Write out your x squared term, so 6x squared in the top left, the c term on the bottom right, and remember the other two things we found were the two factors, negative 2 and negative 15, so minus 2x and minus 15x. Now it shouldn't matter where you write these terms. If I wanted to, I could write them like this, so minus 15x down here and minus 2x. What's important is to keep the 6x squared on the top left and the 5 on the bottom right. Okay, so remember, you have to have an x term in the column, an x term over here. So x times x gives me x squared. How do I make up a 6? Well, I can do 3 times 2. Okay. And by doing so, 3x times what gives me 15x? Well, I get a 5. Minus 5. Okay. And minus 5 times what gives me 5? Well, minus 1 gives me 5. And so I would have my answer here. Y equals 2x minus 5 and 3x minus 1, just by reading the titles in the columns and on the rows. Okay. Over time, method 1 should be your method of choice, especially as you're dealing with the algebra and you're understanding how the mathematics work behind factoring. Okay, let's look at one more. 6x squared minus 15x minus 9. First thing you should always check is there a common factor? Common to 6, 15, and 9 is a 3. So check for the common factor first. Common factor first. How come I didn't do that in the last question? Well, I did. Didn't really mention it because there was no common factor between 6 and 17 and 5, so that wasn't necessary. But always look for it. Okay. So common factor here is 3. So I'm going to factor out a 3. So 3 comes out. 6x squared divided by 3 is 2x squared. 15x divided by 3 is 5x, so minus 5x. Minus 9 divided by 3 is minus 3. And so I've simplified the problem a little bit to make it easier for us to deal with. So I'm going to use what we call the complex trinomial factoring, method number 1. And we also call it product sum factoring because we're looking at the product of A and C. So A times C is equal to, where A is 2 and C is negative 3. Ignore the 3 out in the front. Just deal with what's inside the brackets. So A times C is negative 6. What are my factors of negative 6? Well, I have negative 1 and positive 6, positive 1 and negative 6, 2 and negative 3, and negative 2 and positive 3. And the two numbers I want here are negative 6 and positive 1, because these two add up to negative 5. Okay, so let's write our equation again. Y equals 3, brackets, 2x squared minus 5x minus 3. I am going to split the 5x. Let's turn the round brackets to square brackets because I'm going to be using more brackets. So 2x squared, 5x gets split up into minus 6x plus 1x, and then you have your minus 3. I'm going to group these two terms inside the square brackets and these two terms inside the square brackets. Then we have y equals 3 times, what's the common factor between 2x squared and minus 6x? Well, that common factor is 2x, so 2x, round brackets, 2x squared divided by 2x is just x, minus 6x divided by 2x is minus 3. And here in the next two terms, the common factor is a positive 1, and so we'll say it's x minus 3. Close the square brackets. Look at the fact that you have a common expression as your factor. Factor out the common expression. So y equals 3. But remember, when you're factoring out the common expression, we're still staying within the square brackets. So here I have x minus 3. And then what's left over is 2x and plus 1. And then, once we're done, we can remove the square brackets. Y equals 3 times x minus 3 and 2x plus 1. So let's find the x-intercepts. So set the y value to 0. 0 equals 3 times x minus 3 times 2x plus 1. So 1x will come from this factor, so x equals 3 to make a 0. And to make this factor into a 0, I would have to say x equals, well, let's solve for x. So 2x plus 1 equals 0, and therefore 2x equals negative 1, and x equals negative 1 over 2. So my x-intercepts are 3 and 0, and negative 1 over 2 and 0. So that's how you factor what we call complex trinomials. The algebraic method we commonly refer to as the product sum method, also by dissociating a middle term. And this method number 2 is the kind of what you could call the reverse area or reverse box method. And that ends this video.